At 1:35 in the morning, a young woman stepped out of a car into the darkness of a Utah park. She had just returned from her grandmother's funeral. She was supposed to go home, but she never did. Her name was Mackenzie Lueck. Days later, on a quiet summer morning in Salt Lake City, Utah, a 23-year-old college student stepped out of a car into a dark park. She was alone. She had just returned from her grandmother's funeral, and she had no idea that this moment, this quiet, ordinary moment, would be the last time anyone would ever see her alive. 2 weeks later, police would dig up burned human remains from a backyard. They would belong to her. Her name was Mackenzie Lueck. Mackenzie Lueck was a 23-year-old student at the University of Utah. She was originally from El Segundo, California, and had moved to Utah to study kinesiology and pre-nursing. Friends described her as warm, adventurous, funny, and fiercely independent. She loved travel, fitness, and fashion. She posted photos of hikes, gym workouts, and sunny days on social media. To her parents, Dave and Diana Lueck, she was their firstborn, the one who called home often and always said, "I love you," before hanging up. In June 2019, Mackenzie had just flown back to California to attend her grandmother's funeral, a deeply emotional trip. On June 16, 2019, she boarded a late-night flight back to Utah so she could be ready for school and work the next day. That decision changed everything. Mackenzie's plane landed at Salt Lake City International Airport just before 1 a.m. on Monday, June 17th. Most travelers were heading home. Mackenzie was not. Instead of going back to her apartment, she ordered a Lyft ride. The driver later told police that Mackenzie asked to be dropped off at Hatch Park, a small, dark park in North Salt Lake, about 10 miles away. The driver thought it was strange. It was almost 2 a.m. The park was closed. There was no one else around. But Mackenzie insisted. The Lyft driver dropped her off at 1:35 a.m. and watched as she walked toward a man waiting in another vehicle. That man was Iola Ayayi. Iola Ayayi was 31 years old, living in Salt Lake City. To neighbors, he seemed quiet and normal. He worked in IT. He kept to himself. But what no one knew was that Mackenzie had been communicating with Ayayi online. Investigators later found messages, photos, and location data linking the two. Investigators believe Mackenzie had met Ayayi before, but what happened that night was not what she expected. That was the last moment Mackenzie was ever seen alive. By morning on June 17th, Mackenzie's parents tried calling her. No answer. Her friends tried texting her. No reply. That was not like her. By June 18th, her family was officially worried. Mackenzie was reported missing. Salt Lake City police immediately began tracing her last known movements, phone pings, rideshare records, and security footage. All of it pointed back to one chilling detail. Mackenzie had gone to meet someone and never came back. Detectives identified Iola Ayayi as the man who had met Mackenzie at the park. When police questioned him, Ayayi told them something disturbing. He claimed he did not know Mackenzie, but when detectives searched his phone, they found photos of her, messages, and evidence of communication the very day she vanished. He was lying. Neighbors also told police something even frightening. In the days after Mackenzie disappeared, Ayayi had been seen burning something in his backyard using gasoline. The smell was strong, the fire was unusual, and the timing was horrifying. 11 days after Mackenzie vanished, police executed a search warrant at Ayayi's home. In his backyard, they found a freshly dug pit, burned clothing, charred human remains. Forensic tests confirmed the truth. The remains were Mackenzie Lueck. She had been killed, burned, and buried in an attempt to make her disappear. But she did not disappear. The world was now watching. That same day, June 28, 2019, Ayola Ayayi was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, aggravated kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and desecration of a human body. He would later plead guilty and receive life in prison without parole. Mackenzie's parents had flown from California hoping to bring their daughter home. Instead, they were called to identify burned remains. Her father said later, "This is a nightmare no parent should ever live." Her mother said, "We just want our little girl back." But Mackenzie was gone. Her future, nursing school, marriage, children, dreams, all ended in a dark park at 1:35 in the morning. Mackenzie Lueck trusted someone she thought she knew. She stepped out of a car, and the world lost her forever. At 1:35 a.m., Mackenzie's Lyft dropped her off at Hatch Park in North Salt Lake, Utah, one of the last places she would ever be seen alive. Investigators later pieced together the final known movements recorded from her phone and ride logs. She walked toward a vehicle waiting in the darkness. That man, 31-year-old Ayola Adisa Ayayi, would become the central figure in a case that would grip the nation. By afternoon, Mackenzie had not returned to her apartment, missed scheduled classes, and her phone went unanswered. Things that were completely out of character for the outgoing young student. Mackenzie had not been heard from for days. Her father, deeply concerned, called the Salt Lake City Police Department on June 20th to report her missing. Her friends and family began sharing flyers, organizing searches in parks and public spaces, and pleading with anyone who might have seen her to come forward. In just a matter of days, what began as a peaceful night out after a funeral became one of the most intense missing person investigations Utah had ever seen. After her disappearance was made public, the community rallied. Family members and sorority sisters gathered at Liberty Park in Salt Lake City, handing out flyers and calling for help. News outlets shared photos of Mackenzie and the last footage of her rolling a suitcase through the airport, footage released by Salt Lake City police. Meanwhile, detectives traced her phone and rideshare movements. They pinpointed her last known location, the park, and began pulling cell phone data, ride logs, and witness accounts. They were chasing hope, but with every hour that passed, the fear that something terrible had happened grew stronger. By June 26th and 27th, investigators had identified a home on North 1000 West in the Fair Park neighborhood of Salt Lake City as connected to the case. Officers served search warrants, processing evidence as media helicopters circled and anxious neighbors looked on. Police at this stage weren't revealing names to the public, but they were quietly building a shocking picture, one that hinted Mackenzie might have met someone she thought she could trust, only for her life to be taken from her. On the morning of June 28, 2019, at 9:20 a.m., Salt Lake City Police announced the arrest of Ayola Adisa Ajayi, 31, in connection with Mackenzie's disappearance. He was taken into custody near 1000 Southwest Temple without incident. The charges were severe: aggravated murder, aggravated kidnapping, obstruction of justice, desecration of a body, all in connection to the disappearance and presumed death of the missing student. Police Chief Mike Brown spoke emotionally at a press conference, confirming their belief that Mackenzie had been killed and that investigators were closing in on the truth. Friends and family embraced outside the public safety building in Salt Lake City. Tears, disbelief, and heartbreak all mixed together as they awaited word on what would come next. After Ajayi's arrest, detectives continued the search for Mackenzie's remains. On July 3, 2019, investigators located charred human remains in a shallow grave in Logan Canyon, over 80 miles from Salt Lake City. the remains were eventually forensically confirmed to belong to Mackenzie. What made the discovery even more disturbing was the condition of her remains. Her arms had been bound behind her back. Her body showed evidence of burning before burial. Police described the scene as one of the most heartbreaking they had worked on in years, not just a crime, but a tragedy. It was at this moment the world truly understood the horror of what had happened. Once the remains were identified, news of Mackenzie's death spread nationwide. Vigils were held, including at the University of Utah, where hundreds of students lit candles and shared memories. Friends remembered her as outgoing and positive, a dedicated student who cared about her future, someone who made everyone around her feel welcome and important. Her sorority sisters called her a ball of light, a phrase that echoed in news reports and memorial posts online. The Mackenzie Lueck case wasn't shocking just because of the brutality. It struck a chord because of who she was and what she represented. Here was a young woman losing a grandmother, returning home, hoping to move forward with her life, only to be met with senseless violence instead. Her death was not just a statistic, it was a life cut brutally short. More than a year after her disappearance, on October 7, 2020, Ajayi pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and desecration of a human body. He admitted in court that he had planned to take her life before the meeting ever happened. In exchange for his guilty plea, which spared the death penalty, prosecutors agreed to a life sentence. On October 23, 2020, Ajayi was sentenced to life in the Utah State Prison without the possibility of parole. News outlets reported the emotional courtroom scene, Mackenzie's family tearfully confronting the man responsible for stealing her future. As her mother said in court, "You took our daughter from us. There isn't a day we won't remember." Mackenzie was not just another missing person. She was a daughter, a friend, a sister, a future nurse, a life full of plans, dreams, and possibility. A trip home after a funeral, meant to be healing, became her last journey. A meeting in the dark turned into a nightmare, and her story became a warning, a reminder that real people, real lives, and real futures are behind every headline. After Mackenzie stepped out of her Lyft at 1:35 a.m. on June 17, 2019, she walked toward a waiting vehicle. From that moment forward, her phone stopped moving in normal patterns. Investigators later used cell tower data and digital records to track that the device traveled away from the park and toward a residential neighborhood in Salt Lake City. That neighborhood was where Ayola Ajayi lived. What Mackenzie believed was a late-night meeting turned into a trap. Police later told the court that Ajayi had planned the encounter in advance. He had brought restraints, tools, and materials that showed preparation. This was not random, it was intentional. This was a man calmly confirming that he had ended a young woman's life on purpose. When it came time for victim impact statements, Mackenzie's parents stood. Her mother looked at Ajayi and said through tears, "You took everything from us. You took our daughter. You took our future. You took the life she was supposed to have." Her father's voice broke when he said, "We raised her to trust people. We never imagined that trust would get her killed." People in the courtroom were crying. This was no longer just a case. This was a family being torn apart in real time. 2 weeks later, on October 23, 2020, Ajayi was sentenced. The judge did not hesitate. Life in prison. No parole, no release, ever. Ajayi would die behind bars, but Mackenzie would never get another sunrise. Outside the courthouse, Mackenzie's family spoke to reporters. Her mother said, "There will never be justice for what happened, but at least he will never hurt anyone else." Her father said, "Mackenzie was our world. We will carry her with us for the rest of our lives." They walked away, not in victory, but in grief, because no sentence can bring back a daughter. Mackenzie was not reckless. She was not careless. She was a young woman coming home from her grandmother's funeral, believing she was meeting someone she could trust. Instead, she walked into the last moments of her life. She was supposed to finish school. She was supposed to fall in love. She was supposed to grow old. But she never got the chance, all because one man decided her life didn't matter. Mackenzie Lueck was not a statistic. She was a daughter who called her parents just to say goodnight. She was a student chasing a future in healthcare. She was a young woman who had just buried her grandmother and was trying to go on with her life. Her last night should have ended in her bed. Instead, it ended in darkness. She trusted someone. She stepped out of a car, and the world lost her forever. Years will pass. People will forget headlines, but her parents will never forget the sound of her voice, the plans she had, the life she never got to live. This case is not just about how Mackenzie died. It is about how precious and fragile life really is, and how quickly it can be taken away. Rest in peace, Mackenzie Lueck.